Hello friends, welcome to another video from my series Quick Thoughts On, in which I always talk about different stories from the rich Star Trek universe. This episode is going to be about a classic Star Trek episode called Assignment Earth, which premiered on NBC 50 years and 2 weeks ago, and these are my honest opinions about it. This was not really supposed to be the last episode of Season 2 of Classic Star Trek. This was supposed to be the final episode of Classic Star Trek as a series. If you know the history of the original series, you probably know what I'm talking about. If no, here is a short recap for you. NBC didn't like Gene Roddenberry or Star Trek. Roddenberry himself was seen as problematic and not cooperative, and they needed a man who will do what they want. He was constantly fighting them instead of working with them, and he always pulled inside of his scripts things which were considered to be controversial for 1960s America. If you haven't read the These Are the Voyages books, they are very interesting and filled with lots of official correspondence. So during season 2, NBC decided they have enough of it and decided to cancel the show. Officially, the reason was low Nielsen ratings, and everybody believed it because the numbers were not publicly available. Now, when they are out there, we know that even the later third season, which had the lowest numbers of all of them, had still much better Nielsen ratings than any of the more modern shows. But Roddenberry, because he wanted to stay employed, started to quickly work on another sci-fi show with the working title Assignment Earth, about a time-traveling alien and a 20th century woman. Art Wallace was working on a similar story for Star Trek, so they sat together with Roddenberry and they came up with the script, which was produced as the last episode of season 2 and was supposed to serve as a kind of a backdoor pilot for the newly proposed show. Well, the new show was not greenlit, which is bad, but at the same time, thanks to a pretty big letter-writing campaign, Star Trek was renewed for season 3, which is good. Or let's pretend that it's good. I'll get to the third season in a few months. So this probably does explain why does this episode feel so strange. It almost feels like the Star Trek crew members are just guests in their own show. We open with a shot of the Enterprise orbiting Earth, and immediately the problems start to show. We are told, using the captain's log, that the Enterprise has intentionally traveled to Earth's past for a historic mission to observe how mankind survived the year 1968. Wow, that's stupid in so many ways. Why would the Federation send a starship to observe Earth's history, especially when we soon find out that they knew what will happen? Also, just the idea of going back in time to observe, that's just not very exciting from a storytelling point of view, is it? Just like the fact that we are told how did we get to the 20th century and why, it breaks one of the fundamental principles of visual storytelling. You know, show, don't tell. Suddenly the Enterprise gets hit, for a lack of a better term, by something, and something is beaming to their ship. When Kirk rushes down to the transporter room, he arrives just in time to see that the something which was brought on board was a man in a 20th century business suit and a black cat in his arms. Okay, I admit, that's a damn good teaser. But I have a little suggestion. What if we start with the Enterprise arriving to Earth for some reason, let's say for filing some yearly annual reports or whatever, then they suddenly intercept somebody's tractor beam, and suddenly the channel on which Uhura communicated with Starfleet goes silent. When they try to open a different frequency, they realize that Starfleet is gone, because the strange man was trying to beam to Earth's past and he accidentally took the Enterprise with him. This is a premise which I came up during the actual writing of this script, but it does sound a bit more interesting in my not so humble opinion. The weird man introduces himself as Gary 7. He claims that he's from the 20th century, despite him knowing what Vulcans are, and he has technology to beam through time and space. A man with a fancy suit who has technology which allows him to travel through time and space, and he has a funny sidekick? That must be just a strange coincidence. He says that they interrupted his mission and demands to be sent back to Earth. When Kirk tries to get him arrested, he attacks the guards and Kirk has to phaser him down. He orders McCoy to find out if he's a man or an alien pretending to be a human, and this takes for what feels like an hour. Meanwhile, in the conference room, Spock strokes her pussy. Sorry, that might be a wrong term. Spock grabs the pussy, or that also isn't a very good term. Spock has the cat called Isis on his arms, and he even comments on how strange it is for a logical man to be attached to a purring furball. Chekhov meanwhile reports that Gary 7's transporter signal came from an unknown part of the universe where are no inhabitable planets, which makes it sound like Gary 7 wasn't lying when he said that the inhabitants can actually hide the whole planet, even though Scotty suggests that it's nonsense. Spock and Kirk talk about what will happen in 1968, and it sounds like they know what will exactly happen, even though they were sent to 1968 to find out what happens, apparently. McCoy reports that Gary has a perfect human body, which means he could be a human, and at the same time he could be an alien intruder who took the form of a human. Meanwhile, in the break, Gary pulls out his little thing and uses it to disable the force field and persuade the guard to sleep. So, wait. The fancy-dressed man who has technology which allows him to travel through time and space, and he travels with an unusual companion, now has a sonic screwdriver? Why didn't he arrive at the Enterprise inside a British police box? Anyway, he escapes to the transporter room. When Isis, the cat, arrives there too, he grabs her by the pussy and they beam down to some stock footage of 1960s New York. I think it's sad that when they remastered the show, they didn't even try to make the stock footage look a bit more like the footage which was shot for the series. You can clearly see that those bits were shot on a completely different film stock. Gary materializes inside a safe, inside of a 1960s office set, and yes, only now the real story begins. Gary's surprised that nobody is there and tries to talk to the computer. He explains to the computer and therefore to us that 6,000 years ago aliens took a few humans from Earth and now send them back to prevent Earthlings to destroy themselves. Apparently, the Russians in 1968 have decided to send some nukes to space, and as the response, now the Americans want to send nukes to space to hold the so-called balance of power. The funny thing is that Gary 7 suggests that balance of power is a bad thing. At the same time, a few weeks ago I covered an episode called A Private Little War, where the whole point of the episode was to show us that balance of power is a good thing. and on both episodes Gene Roddenberry was one of the writers. The Office belongs to two agents, a man and a woman, and their mission was to achieve peace by sabotaging the American rocket. Sorry, do I understand that correctly? What would this achieve? Wouldn't sabotaging the American rocket mean that only Russians will have their nukes in space, ready to use them against their American enemies? How is that in favor of peace?